in the Sheraton Hotel. It's on page 16. And we have now a little paragraph with some Talmudic reasoning. This is giving just a little example of how Talmudic reasoning goes. The verse that instructs us to have an occasion in which we recite, and as I told you, relive the story of the Exodus, begins with the words "V'higadat levincha." You should declare to your son. Now the Haggadah comments, Yochel Rosh Chodesh. When should I do this? When should I have this meeting and go through a recitation and reliving of the Exodus from Egypt? Maybe I should start from the first day of the month of Nisan. Yochel Rosh Chodesh. No, that's wrong. Because the verse goes on to say, Bayom Hu, on that day. So Yochel Rosh Chodesh means maybe I should start on the beginning of the month and keep going. That can't be the right description because the verse says that day, so it has only one day in mind. So then it says, well, maybe if there's one day in mind, maybe it would mean the 14th in the afternoon. What happened on the 14th in the afternoon? That's when the Paschal sacrifice was offered. And that's a very special sacrifice. It has unique rules. And you can imagine your child is there, and the child wants to know what's going on, and then the Torah will be telling you, tell them the story of the Exodus, because that's why we're doing what we're doing. Well, that's a reasonable thought. Maybe you should do it on the 14th. But the Haggadah goes on to say that that's a mistake also, because it says in that verse, what you're supposed to say to him is, because of this, Hashem took me out of Egypt. Because of this. Now, THIS in English and Z in Hebrew is a demonstrative. A demonstrative is a word that refers to something that is present in the environment of the speaker. In English, you can't say this book unless the book is visible where you are. Another way of referring to a book which doesn't require that is that. That book can be the book you mentioned 16 minutes ago. That book could be in my house, but not this book. So because of this, when I say that in the verse, there's got to be a this I can point to. I got to be able to point to it and say, because of this, Hashem took me out of Egypt. So now the Haggadah goes on. These words, for the sake of this, I only said in the hour in which matzah and moror, or matzah and moror and the Paschal sacrifice, are resting before you. They're resting before you. Okay, let's review. The middle thought was the 14th in the afternoon. And the Haggadah says, no, that's not right. In the afternoon is not right. It's got to be at night on the 15th. How do I know? Because it says, for the sake of this, Hashem took me out. It's got to be on the table so you can point to it and say, for the sake of this. The obvious question is, put this on the table in the afternoon. And then ask. And then say it. And say for the point of this in the afternoon. How does, for the sake of this, being demonstrative, so you can point to the matzah, the moror, mean it's got to be at night? And the answer is this. Let's see. For the sake of this, God took me out of Egypt. Let's say it's the matzah. I don't know if you're aware, but in many places in the world, since Hanukkah, for months, there's been non-stop baking of matzah. Matzahs are shipped all over the world to various places. Some places from after Sukkot they've been baking matzah. Right? There's a cracker industry, a Jewish cracker industry, shipping to the world. Now, when I take my matzahs, put them on the table, and I say, for the sake of this, God took me out of Egypt, do I mean for the sake of the fact that there will be bakeries all over the world, and they'll be shipping them all over the world, and the world will be flooded with Jewish crackers? That's why God took me out of Egypt? Probably that's not the right answer. So when I point to the matzah and say, for the sake of this, God took me out of Egypt, I'm not pointing to the cracker as a cracker. I'm pointing to the mitzvah that I'm going to do with the cracker. He took me out for the sake of the mitzvah of matzah. Not the existence of crackers, but the mitzvah of eating it. And the mitzvah is only at night. You can't do the mitzvah in the afternoon. So you put it on the table at night, and then you can point to it and say, for the sake of this, Hashem took me out of Egypt. So this is a good example of Talmudic reasoning. You have a command. One of the things you want to know is when I should perform it. And you think up plausible possibilities, and then you look carefully into the verse, and you check the vocabulary and see whether they fit the words or they don't fit the words. And you come out with often a clear indication that, only one answer could be the right answer. Okay? This is all background to the mitzvah we're doing on that night. Now, it says, originally, our ancestors were idol worshippers. And now, Hashem has brought us close to his service. And it quotes a verse from the book of Joshua. Joshua said to the whole people, this is what Hashem, the God of Israel, says, on the other side of the river, your ancestors dwelled from old. Terach, Abraham's father, and the father of Nahor, who was Abraham's brother, and they served other gods. And I took your father, Abraham, from the other side of the river, and I guided him to the land of Canaan, which is the land of Israel, and I increased his descendants, and I gave him Isaac, and I gave to Isaac Yaakov, Jacob, and Esau, and I gave to Esau the mount of Seir as his to inherit it, and Yaakov and his children went down to Egypt. Okay, a very bland report of certain outlines of history, but hidden in this report is great principles. First of all, the Gemara says that the way we tell the story of the Exodus is to go from the low part, a low point of Jewish history, to a high point. Migdus l'shvach, from that which is degrading and embarrassing to that which is praiseworthy. And the Gemara has a difference of opinion how that should be done. One says the story should go from slavery to freedom, and the other says the story should go from idol worship to receiving the Torah at Sinai. So let's think about that. Slavery to freedom, yeah, that's exactly what we're celebrating. That movement from being slaves to being free took place on the night of the 15th of Nisan, which is the night in which we make the Seder. So of course, that story has to be told. What the other position is saying is you have to expand your scope. You have to go back to Terach, who's the ancestor of the Jewish people, who served idols, and expand your scope into the future to go to the receipt of the Torah at Sinai. Why should we do that? So someone might say, well, when you're dealing with history and you're talking about a particular event, obviously the more scope you give it, the more understanding you're going to have. So definitely, if you go back to Abraham's father who served idols and then project forward to the receipt of the Torah at Sinai, you'll understand the Exodus much better if you'll do that. That's true. That's definitely true. But once you have that on board, where do you draw the line? How about going back to Noah, the flood, and going forward to enter the land of Israel? Or how about going back to the creation and going forward to the coming of the Messiah? Where do you stop the historical frame, and why? And I think the answer has to be the one who says you got to go from Terach to Sinai is saying, without understanding that the Exodus is the linchpin of moving from idol worship to Sinai, you can't understand the Exodus at all. You have no correct understanding of the Exodus. Yes, if you went from the flood to entry to the land of Israel, or from the creation to the Messiah, you'd have more understanding, deeper understanding. But if you leave this out, you haven't got it. I think the reason for that is this. I'm going to mention this philosophical point now. It's on record. It's recorded. I have a whole share of this. But the Jewish idea of freedom, and I think it's a philosophical idea as well, Jewish idea of freedom is a means to doing something that's valuable. The value of your freedom is precisely the value of what you will do with your freedom. Some freedoms are more valuable, some freedoms are less valuable, and some freedoms aren't valuable at all. And for some people, freedom is negative because they do terrible things with their freedom. Freedom in and of itself has no intrinsic value. If you have just a simple difference between being free or being unfree, without any further consequences, then there's no difference in value whatsoever. So, here you're seeing the Jewish people going from slavery to freedom. Okay, why? What's the point of that? What's the significance of that? The answer is, it's a midpoint in a transition from idol worship to serving God. That's how you understand its value and its significance. This is reflected in two famous texts. One is where Moses is at the burning bush, and God says, I want you to be my representative to go down and we'll engineer the Exodus. And Moses has 1,000 questions. And one of his questions is, what did the Jewish people do to deserve your taking them from slavery to freedom? And God's answer, very, very, I think, maybe a little shocking and very powerful. What did they do to deserve it? Nothing. They didn't do anything to deserve it. So why are you taking them out? Two reasons. Number one, I promised their ancestors. And number two, when they go out, they're going to serve me on the mountain where they receive the Torah. Which means I'm taking them out as an investment in their future. It's not that they've done something already to deserve it, and then it's like compensation. It's an investment in what they're going to do in the future. And that means that the idea of freedom is an investment in what you're going to do with it. That's the concept of freedom. And then, whether you deserve freedom, or whether other people deserve freedom, or whether we deserve continuous freedom, depends in part on what we do with our freedom. It's not absolute. Freedom is not absolute. Yeah.
So maybe then freedom is just the wrong term then to use altogether, because my understanding is that it's more really of a management change, right? I mean, we were enslaved, we were shackled to the Egyptians, and then we entered a covenant with Hashem. So our shackles change. Obviously, I think that we all prefer this side than shackled in Egypt, but is that not like a good way of putting it? Or?
It's a very good way of putting it, and in fact, the sources do talk about it that way. And they even say that slavery in Egypt is a certain preparation for the relationship that we have to Hashem. What you're saying now, I think, is gold. It's very interesting. The word that's used in our relationship to Hashem is eved, which is exactly the same word that's used for our relationship to our Egyptian masters. Now, your poor, embarrassed English translators don't want to put in slave. That doesn't sound good. So they put in servant. Servant. What does that mean? Nothing really. It's too very vague. That's good. You won't. The hairs on the back of your neck won't stand up in horror. But it's eved. It means eved. And I think you're right. And I think the smart person, if he finds that connection to a person or a project will bring him a great benefit, will take it even if he really loses his freedom. And he's using his freedom to choose to lose his freedom. And since I've introduced the idea, I'll just give you a few examples. You want to play classical music. Say you play the violin. Maybe we mentioned this in the previous, I can't remember what I do when I do, where I do it. So, let's say you play Beethoven. Okay, first of all, there are the notes on the page. You have to play the notes as they're written on the page. You can't just spontaneously play what you feel, what appeals to you, what expresses your inner movements. No, there are notes on the page. But it's worse than that, because the concertmaster, the first violinist, will say, play it with an up bow and not a down bow, and play it with a certain amount of vibrato, and play it on this string and not on that string. Where's your freedom? Gone. What you get out of it is playing Beethoven, and playing Beethoven well. So there are times when you say, I'm willing to give up my freedom because giving it up in this way, I'll be doing something much better for me by giving up my freedom. There are people who have a rough adolescence and who go into the army because they know that in the army they'll learn discipline, they'll learn focus, they'll learn self-control, and sometimes they're right. They will learn that. In the army, you have very little freedom. Very little freedom. But they know that kind of, and people who have drug problems and who voluntarily go to a drug rehabilitation where, depending upon the type of rehabilitation it is, their day will be structured and their diet will be structured, and of course they won't have access to the drug. And so the idea that you lose your freedom isn't something which contradicts the value of your life often. So now here the idea is, now freedom, I think, in order not to beg any questions, freedom is freedom from some kind of pressure or duress that affects your ability to choose. It's a negative concept, freedom from. I know people talk about freedom too, but I think that's inappropriate use of language, and it's prejudicial. But then the question, what are you going to do with your freedom? So they went from being subject to the Egyptians to being not subject to the Egyptians. Then they chose to accept, as you said, a change of management. And that's something which then it does put them in another position of servitude, but they chose it. That's what they used the loss of the control of the Egyptians to be able to do. So I think that picture is very good. So that's the first thing here, to understand what the value of freedom is in Jewish terms. That's number one. And then, what about this verse from Joshua? I know here in my text is split up into a separate paragraph. I took your father Abraham from across the river, and I guided him through the land of Canaan, and I increased his descendants. I gave him Isaac. Doesn't mention Ishmael, interestingly. That to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. I gave Esau the land of Seir, Mount of Seir, and Yaakov and his children went down to Egypt. Now, why is Joshua telling me about the history of Esau? Like, what do I care about that? Why is that in the same breath? And there are at least two reasons. Number one, we have in the modern world an unfortunate expression, the Jewish God, the Christian God, the Muslim God, and so forth and so on. If you'll ask a Muslim, who do you worship? He won't say the Muslim God, he'll say the creator of the universe. Each one of these religions sees that there is only one God. There aren't many gods. Isn't it? There are gods of each kind. This is the Muslim conception of the Creator, and this is the Christian conception of the Creator. And yes, I will say it in prejudiced fashion. And the third one, ours, is the truth about the Creator. So, talk about the Jewish God. So we have to understand, the God that we worship runs the whole world. Doesn't just run Jewish affairs, as if, it was a private affair. That's not true at all. But secondly, our development is a playoff. Jacob and Esau were brothers. They grew up together. And part of Jacob becoming who he became is due to and reflection of what Esau became. And there's just a hint of what's going on here. And the contrast, Esau was given a piece of geography to inherit that belongs to him. And Jacob went into exile. That's also quite striking. This is the God of Abraham, who's caring for the Jewish people and engineering the Jewish people's development. And to Esau, he gives immediate gratification. Here's your spot your place in the sun, in the world. And to us, we went down to exile. The implication is, exile for us was as valuable for us and infinitely more valuable than having a piece of geography was for Esau. This is the story of, after all, it starts with Terach, Abraham's father, and then Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob, and Esau is off to the side. And then, right? So then we have to understand what is the greatness of exile for the Jewish people. I will come back to that. We're together so far? Good. All of these are comments on how to do the mitzvah. Now, here's another piece of Talmudic reasoning. Blessed is the one who keeps, present tense, his promise to Israel. blessed is he, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, analyzed the ending to do according to what he said to Abraham in the covenant between the pieces. Shenema, what did God say to Abraham in that covenant? He said to Avram, you should know for sure that your descendants will be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and your descendants shall serve the masters of that land, and the masters of that land shall oppress your descendants 400 years. Notice the pause. 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve, I will judge, and afterwards they will exit with great possessions. That's the promise, that's the future that God informed Abraham of. And we are blessing Hashem who keeps his promise and analyzed the end. Now, this says 400 years. As a matter of fact, the Jews were in Egypt 210 years. So that has to be understood. That has to be understood. And now I'm going to point out to you that the verse that describes what Hashem said to Avram is ambiguous. And it is what philosophers of language call syntactic ambiguity. The ambiguity is in the structure of the sentence. What modifies what relates to what. Let me read it to you again, and then I'll tell you the kind of structure we're talking about. What did HaKadosh Baruch Hu say to Avram? You shall surely know that your descendants will be strangers in a land that doesn't belong to them, and they will serve the masters of the land, and the masters of the land will oppress them 400 years. So the structure is A, B, C, 400 years. That can be read in three different ways. You could read it, ABC is a process with three parts, and the whole of it will take 400 years. But you don't have to read it that way. You could read it, A is going to happen, maybe it'll take 1,000,000 years. I'm not talking about A. A will happen, and then B and C will happen for 400 years. Or you could read it, A is going to happen on its own time, and B is going to happen on its own time, comma, pause, and C will happen for 400 years. What does the 400 years modify? The whole of ABC? Or just B and C? Or just C? The text doesn't tell you. Well, if that's the case, there are at least three different ways you could understand the verse, and this gives the Creator a certain flexibility. Because if he manages the history so that A, B, and C together take 400 years, the verse came true. If he manages the verse so that A is separate and B and C take 400 years, the verse came true. And if he manages that A and B are separate and C took 400 years, the verse comes true. The verse could come true in three different ways, which gives the Creator choices as to how to manage the history so as to make the verse true. Now, it's time for a little quiz. Which of the three possible ways of reading it would make the total historical period shortest?
ABC is 400 years?
Sorry?
ABC would be 400 years.
Right. If all three together are 400 years, that's the shortest possible length of the historical period. If A is separate and there's no limit to how long it could be, then the whole thing could be much, much longer. Now, the description of A, B, and C doesn't all refer to slavery. It doesn't even all refer to being in Egypt. So here's how the tradition takes it, based on other verses that calculate the events. When Abraham has his son Isaac, from that time on until the Exodus is 400 years. Did Abraham have possession of the land of Canaan in which he was living? No, he did not. Proof, when Sarah dies, he has to buy her a burial plot. Hello, if the whole land belongs to him, he wouldn't have to buy it. Is to buy it and pay for it with good currency. See, he's already living in a land that doesn't belong to him. But the verse says, your children, your descendants will be a stranger. Okay. So then, once Isaac is born, that time can be triggered. And then, they move from one land that doesn't belong to them, namely Canaan, to another land that doesn't belong to them, namely Egypt. And then the oppression starts, and the slavery starts. All of that takes 400 years. The 210 is the time they spent in Egypt. But that's not the whole of the ABC. The whole of the ABC is 400 years. And that way, there's no... Now, this is what says, he analyzed the end, because analysis means, nothing means, but it backs up, in this case, a choice of alternatives. How shall I manage it? And our sources tell us that if another day had gone by in Egypt, the whole process would have been lost. Our assimilation and loss of Jewish identity and Jewish values and Jewish focus was so profound that had we been there another day, the whole experiment would have been over. So Kodesh Baruch Hu realized the interpretation of the verse that makes the period of time the shortest, so as to be able to take us out in time, so as to be able to save us. That's what it means that he calculated the end. And by the way, the numerical value of Kates is 190. And so 400 minus 190 is 210, which is the number of years that we were there. So that's Kuf Tzadi.
Where is that?
Chishev es HaKates. The second line.
Oh, there it is.
Okay. Kuf Tzadi is 190, and that's just a hint that, he used Kates. He took off the 190 and being there for 210 years is then fulfilled. Okay? Now, the next piece is also a bit subtle. And this is what stood for our ancestors and for us. For not only one, historically, stood up against us to destroy us, to annihilate us, rather, in every generation, there are those who stand up against us to annihilate us, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu saves us from their hand. Okay, now if you learned in Cheder, they're very, very careful about this. If there's a pronoun, they'll ask you, what does it refer to? If it's he, which he? Then, what time was it? There, what place was it? They force you to identify the references of the pronouns. Here you start with a pronoun, and this is what has stood for our ancestors for us. What's the this? I think the obvious answer is, well, you see, historically we've had a lot of oppression and a lot of attempts to annihilate us. And I'll tell you what stood for us, what saved us from all those dangers, is the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saved us from their hand. That's what stood for us, the fact that he saved us. That is one way you can read those words. But there's another way you can read the words, and that is that this refers to both the oppression and the saving. Both the oppression and the saving is what has stood for us throughout the centuries. Because typically the oppression comes to the Jewish people as a whole, or a large body of the Jewish people, because of their growing failures to grasp and to be committed to and to realize and live the way the Torah wants them to live. And because of that, when they're losing their identity, then the oppression reminds them of who they are. They're not allowed to simply slip out under the table. There are those who have pointed out that the final solution of the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, came from the country in which the Jews were most assimilated, Germany. In Europe, that was the maximally assimilated country. they're the ones who. So there is that. So then you can read that this is what has stood for our ancestors in two ways, and you have to have both of them in mind. Okay? Everybody together? Fine. Next. Say ulmat. Go out and learn. What did Lavan the Aramean try to do to Jacob our father? For Pharaoh only decreed against the males. At a certain point in the oppression, he decreed that the newborn male babies should be drowned. Lavan endeavored to uproot everything. As it says, now this verse can be translated in two ways, but this is what the Haggadah intends. Arami, an Aramean, someone from Aram, Oved, tried to annihilate Avi, my father, and he, my father, went down to Egypt and dwelled there with a very small number of people, and there it became a great, powerful, and numerous nation. Well, if you read Arami Oved Avi as an Aramean wanted to destroy my father, would you know that it was Lavan? You'd have to go back and check the sequences with Lavan to see where he plotted against Jacob and where he wanted to destroy him. Furthermore, that's not the only way to read it. In fact, reading this way is a little in need of supplementation. Really, the word is destroys, not wanted to destroy, and you have to put that in. It could be read, Arami, Oved, a wandering Aramite, because Oved can mean also wandering, lost, was my father. My father was a wandering person from Aram, and he went down to Egypt. You could read it that way, then it wouldn't refer to Lavan at all. Okay, let's go back to the beginning of the paragraph. Say umat, go out and learn. That's a very atypical invitation in our literature. Very atypical. In the Babylonian Talmud, the invitation to an analysis or a group discussion is Toshma, come and hear. Come, not go out, and hear, not learn. In the Jerusalem Talmud and in the Zohar, the invitation is Toach Chazi or Toach Chami, which means come and see. This is utterly different. It's not come, it's go out. And it's not see or hear, it's learn. I did find this phrase once else in the Talmud, but it's very, very rare. What does it mean? Well, to go out means at least to leave where you are. So you're in a place, and where you are, you're not going to get it. You're blinded, you're prejudiced, you're not going to get it. You got to exit that place. And after you exit the place, the point that we're making is one which can be understood and appreciated if you learn it. If you learn it. So obviously there's something subtle here about what's going on, and it could be missed. If you go back through the sequence with Lavan, I'm not going to do it now, it would take too long, but go back to the sequence of Lavan, he's the kind of person who is careful to make his surface appearance appropriate, but he is totally self-centered, totally materialistic, and totally antagonistic to Jacob's goal of living a certain type of life. So let me rehearse just a few of the details. Jacob is running because his brother Esau wants to kill him, and his mother found an excuse, go to my family, Lavan is her brother, go to my family in Lavan, in Aram, and there you'll take refuge until Esau doesn't want to kill you anymore. So he comes, And Lavan takes him in, he's family. And then after 30 days, Lavan says, listen, you and I are family. Why should you serve me for nothing? Why should you serve me for nothing? What's he talking about? What he's talking about is the very first day he took him in, he put him to work. You wanna sleep here? You wanna eat here? Work! No freeloading here. Oh, we're family? Yeah. After a month he says, Conley, we are family. You shouldn't have to serve me for nothing. Nothing. No, I'll pay you. Tell me what you want as wages. What does that sound like? Number one, no one stays here free. Not family or no family, nobody stays here free. That doesn't sound like a person who's invested in family and is kind and generous and outgoing and sensitive and, giving. Okay, so Jacob says, I'll serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. He says, done. 7 years go by, and there's a wedding, and Lavan substitutes the older sister Leah for Rachel against the deal. Jacob in the morning is quite upset, let's put it that way. And he challenges him, but he says, he says, you surely didn't think when we said Rachel that you were going to have Rachel first, did you? We don't let the younger marry before the elder. Of course you understood that it would be Leah and then Rachel afterwards. I mean, you understood that, didn't you? No, he didn't understand it. And in fact, when he made the deal, he said, Rachel, your younger daughter. So they'll be like, no room to misinterpret and reinterpret and so forth and so on. But we just don't do it that way, Okay, so now he's married to both and serves another 7 years for the sake of the seventh. Okay. And in the seventh year, he says, okay, that's 14 years. Give me my children, my wives and my children. Give them to me. Don't they belong to you? Yeah, but we know who Lavan is. Lavan thinks he owns everything. Give them to me. I want to go home. And Lavan says, I have guessed that I've been blessed by God because you're here. Stay. So Jacob is brought, I didn't see it in the commentaries, but one explanation is out of the gratitude for the fact that he took him in. I took him in and put him to work? Yeah, but he took him in. That's something for which you have to show gratitude. And in the Jewish sources, we have to have gratitude to the Egyptians because they took us in. It's a very big Jewish value. Okay, he wants me to stay, and they name wages. But now he says, I have to provide for my family. So they name wages. Okay, he says another 6 years. During that period of time, it's a question of which animals the flocks will produce, and the flocks produce different animals, and Lavan feels that he's not getting what he wanted. He changes the wages until it comes a point when it's clear to Jacob that Lavan has turned against him and his cousins have turned against him. So he decides to run. So he gathers together Lavan is 3 days' journey distant from him, and he confers with his wives and gets their voluntary consent, and they gather everything and they run with all their flocks, which they have now, flocks and servants. And Lavan chases after him with his friends who form an army and catches him, and he says, what did you do? You ran and you if you had told me you wanted to go, I would have sent you with celebration and song and feasting and so on and so on. You did, and by the way, you stole my gods, which Rachel did. She stole the gods of her father. So Jacob says, I ran because I said that if I don't run, you'll take your daughters and grandchildren from me, and they belong to me. And as far as stealing your gods, search everywhere you want. We'll see if you find your gods in my possessions. He searches everywhere, doesn't find them. That's the whole story, how Rachel was able to hide them. So then Jacob opens up after 20 years. And it's a long speech. You ran after me, you treated me like a thief. Here, show before my company and your company. Where's the stolen goods that you said I have? It's not here. You're a liar. And furthermore, if I had not run, you would have taken everything from me. I ran because otherwise I would have been left with nothing. You wouldn't have sent me with a celebration and music and dancing. You would have stolen everything from me. So then Lavan makes the following speech. Oh, by the way, the first thing that Lavan says when he speaks to Jacob, he says, I have the power to do evil to you. And the word you there is plural. Lasos lachem ra. But the God of your father came to me last night and told me not to do that, which is written in the text itself that God came to. I have the power to do evil to you, plural. Who's you, plural? Well, what? His daughters and his grandchildren and the flocks and everything else. And now he says, the daughters are mine, and the grandchildren are mine, and the flocks are mine. Everything you see is mine. Oh, really? Aha. So that's how you look at it, hey? You really look at it like it's all yours. So then you're verifying what Jacob said. If he had said he wanted to go, you'd have kicked him out with nothing, because it's all yours. And then he says the following words, and what evil can I do to all of these, which is mine? But you said 2 hours ago that you have the power to do evil to you. He doesn't mind being caught in a lie. There are cultures like that. Before he said, I have the power to do you evil, and now he said, I do evil to them? It's all mine. So clearly he had some vicious intent here, that it's all his. That's what you see from the surface. So he's crafty, he's willing to cheat, he's willing to lie. What's his underlying motivation? His underlying motivation is that, Jacob, you're a dreamer. You have in mind a totally unrealistic life goal, and you can live with your dream, and you can die with your dream. I don't care. Your wives are my daughters. Your children are my grandchildren. You're living in my culture, my society, and when you're gone, it'll all be mine. It'll be over. He really did want to uproot the whole thing. He really did want to uproot the whole thing. But you have to read it, and you have to read it carefully, and you have to read it with subtlety, and you have to rely also on the oral tradition, which for us is part of the original information. And that's why it says, go out of your customary feelings and learn. And I think we have modern counterparts of this. I'm sure that if in 1928 you had made a trip to Germany and asked German Jews, how is it to be a German Jew? Wow, it's wonderful. Be a German Jew, it's wonderful, top of the world. Enlightened, progressive, democratic country, and what could be better than this? And in much miniature terms, but also disturbing, ask an American Jew 15 years ago. Could 15 years ago anyone have imagined random violence against Jews in the streets and marches of tens of thousands of people calling for Jewish bloodshed and political parties and elements of government which don't want to take action against them and don't want to protect Jews? Could that have been imagined 15 or 20 years ago in America? Surely not. That couldn't possibly happen. That's why a lot of the people on the left, October 7th, this can't happen. It can't happen. And it did happen. Some of them admitted it. So this is the Tseilmad moment where you have to leave your prejudices behind. Now here, I'm going to go back to, this is what I mentioned with a verse from Joshua. So it says, Pharaoh only decreed against the newborn male children, and he wanted to uproot everything. The Netziv has an essay on anti-Semitism, and in particular on exile, what it means to live in exile and to be successful in exile. The Netziv says what the verse in Joshua and these verses over here tell us is that we had to undergo a period of exile for a certain purpose I'm not going to go into in a moment, and he gave us instructions how to survive. Yisrael Badad. The Jewish nation has to be isolated, culturally, religiously, and geographically. Who made the first ghetto? So you say, well, see, ghetto is an Italian word. Probably it was an early European thing that happened in Italy. No. The first ghetto was made by Joseph. Because when he told his family to come down, he said, come to Goshen. Goshen is near me. You'll all be in Goshen. Geographically centralized, where you'll all be together. Furthermore, they were practicing circumcision, which means they were physically different from the Egyptians. Now, the Netziv points out, there's a verse which says, God overturned their hearts to hate his people. That means, when the Jews first came down to Egypt, they weren't hated. They were respected. Indeed, the Netziv says, they were loved. When did it change? When they dropped this shield of being isolated. And the Midrash records both things. Number one, they stopped doing circumcision. And number two, they moved out geographically to live cheek by jowl with the Egyptians. So much so that when we left, it says, Kodesh Baruch Hu says, tell them, each woman should take from her neighbor, her Egyptian neighbor, her valuables, and I'll make sure that they want to give it to you, and so forth and so on. It means we had Egyptian neighbors. We weren't living in Goshen anymore. So, says the Netziv, the fact that they gave up the divine strategy of survival, not only survival, but security and flourishing in exile, since they gave it up. So then, the security and the flourishing disappeared. So, this idea of what Paro wanted to do is because we gave that up. And now he says, had we spent the 400 years with Lavan, we would have been totally lost. We would have been totally lost. So the going down to Egypt was a way of saving us, because in Egypt we have a survival mechanism. We didn't use that survival mechanism to the greatest extent that we could have, and therefore the end had to be hastened, not 400 years, but 210 years. Yes, but at least you had a mechanism. That's what he says. And I believe, I understand him correctly, by applying it this way. When he lived with Lavan, he couldn't have used that survival mechanism, because his wives were Lavan's daughters, and his children are Lavan's grandchildren. Where are you going to go? Live in a cave? He couldn't isolate himself there. And since that's the survival and flourishing mechanism in exile, he couldn't put it into practice. So he moved him to Egypt, where he could put it into practice, and his descendants could put it into practice. And as long as they did, things were good. And as soon as they didn't, then it began to deteriorate. So that's a deeper picture of what's going on here. That this going down to Egypt was saving us from an even worse fate. That's an Arami Oved Avi. This Aramean wanted to destroy. He would have been successful. He would have been successful. And you could ask, well, why didn't he give us a strategy to overcome that? That I don't know. He wanted this strategy to be the strategy that we employ, and that's why we went down to Egypt. So these are some themes that are not exactly on the surface, but they're there. Okay. See you, Mir Hashem, tomorrow, and we will continue.
Thank you, Rob.